horrifying thing. So the destruction of the city. So think about trying to, as well, continue our operations, and then the humanitarian side to this, of taking care of the population, and then sustain and have all the logistics. This is the challenge. So where this goes from here, and to get into the latter phases of it, is that MacArthur gives Eichelberger and 8th Army the orders to clear out something of the rest of the Philippines, the other islands, on the southern part of our map and beyond. So this goes on over the spring and early summer of 1945. 8th Army will carry out 35 plus amphibious operations. It is again a masterpiece in amphibious operational art. They liberate some 7 million people. They suffer 2,000 killed and about 7,000 wounded, kill untold numbers of Japanese soldiers, and really just succeed at every level in some pretty tough fighting at times. Why don't we know that much about it? Because it's kind of strategically pointless. You're going in the wrong direction from Tokyo. And so this is not all that well known, but MacArthur felt this was important to do because he was worried about Japanese atrocities against the population and mistreatment of Filipinos and wanted them liberated as soon as possible. So you have that, in addition to, of course, the fighting in Luzon continues to the end of the war. Very unglamorous, very much just a grinding kind of thing, mainly in the northern part of the island. And I just want to give you a quick snapshot into that fighting and the nature of it. These are basically battles of annihilation against desperate groups of Japanese. And in heat, insects, rain, mud, privation, it's very much an infantryman's fight to a great extent. The infantry took about 90% of the casualties for the Americans. The violence of it was appalling. One example. 4 months on the line, the 130th Infantry Regiment of the 33rd Division expended 44,000 mortar shells, 6,400 105mm self-propelled rounds, about 30,000 grenades, and 1.4 million machine gun bullets. The regimental staff calculated that on average, the expenditure of, get this, 300 pounds of ordnance for every casualty inflicted upon the Japanese. 300 pounds of ordnance. Think about all the shipping that took for that ordnance, and then to move it to where it needed to go, much less fire it off at whatever targets you've got. So 6th Army, by the end of the war, as this thing peters out, reported about 38,000 battle casualties. But I would argue that's kind of disingenuous. When you look at disease, immersion foot, combat fatigue, all those things that relate to combat, the casualty numbers were over 93,000. Okay, so that's almost on par with the Battle of Normandy, by the way. So it's kind of comparable to the grinding fall 44 campaign that Eisenhower's armies fought, to the Argonne Forest in World War I, and Grant's Overland campaign in 1864. So the war ends, and we end up with some legacies here in Luzon, but I would argue the larger war that I'll conclude on. We've seen the Army transform into from a small provincial force into a modern, lavishly equipped, techno-rich, mechanized army, arguably, as I said, the most potent ground arm on the planet. In Asia, from an Asian perspective, the war was really kind of just beginning. You have post-colonial strife, bloodshed, upheaval. Of course, the Cold War cost something in the order of about 10 million lives in the decades to come, some of them American, by the way, in places called Korea and Vietnam. So really, the war is just beginning. The conflict is just beginning from the perspective of many people in the Pacific and Asia. Of course, another key legacy is the Chinese Civil War and its outcome, and a major reason why many of us are here today. That is absolutely a legacy of World War II and of the Army's struggle in World War II to forge a productive alliance with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese, one of the most ill-fated alliances in American history. Speaking of alliances, we have then in place at the end of World War II an alliance structure that is still in place today as we look around and see. Okay? And specifically, I would point to some very, very close alliances with Australia and New Zealand that very much come out of World War II. Believe it or not, about 1 million American servicemen either passed through or were stationed in Australia at some point in World War II. Think about everything that means culturally for both peoples and does ever since. It's a remarkable, remarkable thing. And the last legacy, I would say, the savagery of the combat has set the tone that has been in place ever since and is much more analogous to what we've experienced ever since World War II than the European theater was. where you have some level of rules of warfare. In this war, the Japanese recognized no such rules as Americans would have wanted to have them. And the Americans then had to decide, what do we do? How do we respond to that? Do we follow rules? Do we not? And I would argue all of our conflicts have been that way ever since. So last point, from Korea to Afghanistan, and we see this is kind of the harbinger, about 90% of U.S. casualties have occurred in ground combat, in spite of all the other revolutionary changes we've had to warfare since then. So in that sense, the war was really more of a beginning than an end. So I'll conclude on that note. If there are any questions, I'd love to take them. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, John, thanks again. What an incredible presentation to all of us. Mick Bednarik, Fluor Corporation. Real quick, and maybe a softball question for you, but as we strive to remember and learn the lessons of military history, and we look to the future of the joint force. So from the past that you've highlighted, not only the Battle of Luzon, but as we look to the future, what key takeaway would you recommend to us as we learn from those historical vignettes that you've highlighted as we look to the future of the joint force? Thank you.
So I would say, I mean, this is self-serving. I would say history is so front and center as a force multiplier that you absolutely have to learn from the successes, the mistakes of others in the past in order to have any sense of how you're going to approach whatever problems you have ahead of you. I think also, too, jointness. This is where I think you see in World War II the beginning of the jointness that we take for granted today. And I think MacArthur's team is kind of an example of that. Kincaid and also Admiral Daniel Barbet, who were very, very close to MacArthur's staff at this point in working the operations they needed to do. George Kenney, his aerial commander, is a remarkable commander, and I think they have melded that extremely well. I think cultural understanding is another element of this. We got away in World War II with not having the kind of cultural understanding that we are going to need to going forward. And I mean that in terms of whatever the operational area happens to be, but also all these partners. The Americans and the Filipinos get on reasonably well in World War II, but one of the reasons is because the Japanese and the Filipinos didn't quite as much as the Americans did. I think that there's a lesson there that we need to be better at that. Those are the three that off the top of my head, there's probably more if I had more time to think about it, but yeah, I would say those are the three that are front and center.
Ken Kreitzer, Cam Vets Media, Dr. McManus, great talk. One of my uncles served in the battles in the Philippines and the U.S. Army. We've done a lot of research on casualties, names we read on Memorial Day. One turned out to be a soldier who died in what was said to be the largest tank battle in the Philippines conflict. Do you recall that one in your research?
You mean in 1945?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the Japanese had the equivalent of about an armored brigade in like the central part of Luzon. Now, they will attack from the east. It's one of the things Kruger had worried about is counterattacks the Japanese would have coming from the east that might cut his supply lines leading down to Manila. The Japanese will launch this tank attack, but honestly, they're kind of outclassed. We tend to forget, I think, that the Pacific War was a tankers' war as well, especially as we get later into the war. MacArthur has the equivalent of about a division's worth of armor. It's just not organized the same way that we do in Europe. So the Americans have qualitatively better tanks, they're better organized, they have more firepower. And so the Japanese, in a way, with that is the biggest tank battle. There's another smaller one in 1940, either 41 or 42 in the first campaign that involves the 192nd Tank Battalion on the U.S. side. But in this one, in 45, the Japanese are kind of just launching their tanks out almost as sacrificial lambs. And so they don't have much chance to affect the campaign.
Sir, thank you for being here. Let's give Dr. McManus a big round of applause.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. McManus, for those great remarks and to kick us off today. Now we'll turn to our panel titled Positional Advantage, Combine Joint Campaigning with Land Power in Competition and Conflict. The moderator for this panel is our own General Ronald Clark, Commanding General of the U.S. Army Pacific. He, along with other military senior leaders from across the Pacific, will share their experience and insights. General Clark, the floor is yours. Let's give them a round of applause as they come.
Good morning and aloha. It's my honor this morning to moderate this panel of distinguished leaders, warriors, and friends. Yasu Morishita, Roy Galito, and Simon. We're not going to go through a full bio, but I'd just like to say a few things up front. First, General Morishita, the Chief of Staff of the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force. Trusted ally, staunch believer and friend when it comes to the Strategic Land Power Network. And he's been developing interoperability at scale in the JGSDF. During Yamasakura this year, we conducted a warfighter exercise with America's First Corps and the JGSDF and Australian Army were right alongside. But the leadership from General Morishita to not only lead that interoperability effort for the Army, but really lead the way for the Joint Force in Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morishita. Lieutenant General Roy Galito, the 66th Chief of the Philippine Army, is going to try not to say a whole lot today because he's got a keynote as well, so I don't want to steal his own biscuits.
Just a little bit.
But he has been instrumental in the Philippine Army in their transformation from a strategy tied to counterterrorism to one of territorial defense. Not just strategy, but also doctrine and capabilities for the Philippine Army. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant General Roy Galito. And last but not least, Lieutenant General Simon Stewart, Australia's Chief of Army. He's neck deep in modernization of his army and working to fight through the challenges of the littorals and building transformational capabilities on and from the land that can affect the littorals and the maritime and air domains as well. He's partnering right now, his army, with U.S. Army Pacific through the 3rd MDTF, being right now deployed to Australia to tee up the exercises we're going to conduct together at Talisman Sabre. A great friend and a man, again, who is transforming his army and working to keep us flat with interoperability, Lieutenant General Simon Stewart. In our theater, our Army strategy, which we've been talking about for the last couple of days, is really about how we leverage, how we capitalize, how we focus on gaining positional advantage on key terrain. That key terrain is not just the physical terrain, but also human terrain. Because at the end state, our ability to gain positional advantage gives us convergence at the joint and combined level of capabilities that focus on deterrence, our ability to be able to prevent war. And with that, understand that it's not just about the United States Army, it's not just about the joint force, but it's really about our allies and partners working together to gain positional advantage to prevail. So I'd like to start by offering opening comments to General Morishita.
Okay. まずはですね、今回、このようなですね、パネルを準備していただきまして、本当に黒木大将ありがとうございます。
Well, firstly, I would like to express my appreciation to General Clark that let me join this panel. It's my honor.
昨年はですね、ここに、日米豪韓でですね、パネルを実施をいたしまして、今回日米豪非でまた地域的なですね、 仲間たちがこうやって議論できるというのは非常に嬉しく思っています。
In the last LANPAC, we are here with Japan and the U.S. and Australia and the ROC representative, and now we have like a Philippine representative here, and it's a great honor.
今回のテーマのですね、ポジショナルアドバンテージというのをもらったときにですね、私は非常にこれ、困惑するというかですね、非常に迷いました。2つのですね、意味があるんだなと思って迷いました。
Well, when I heard the theme of this panel at the first time, I was thinking like there can be the two like meanings, and I was like wondering how should I take this meaning.
本当にこれがですね、日本にとってアドバンテージなのかということなんですね。
The reason why it is like because like if it is that position Japan has is like advantage or not.
日本は皆さんご承知の通りですね、ユーラシア大陸の東端にある島嶼国家でありますけれども、
As you know, like Japan is an archipelagic country located in the very far east of the Eurasian continent.
地政学的には見るとやはり大陸国ですね、ハードランドからが外に出ていくのを遮るリムランドにあたるわけですね。
You know, geopolitically, like that means like geopolitically, like Japan is like blocking the heartland, the invasion, going forward to the Pacific.
歴史的にもロシアが南下するため、太平洋に出るためにですね、非常に大事な地域、そして今においては中国が太平洋に出るのを遮るために非常に重要な要衝になっているというふうに思っています。
By seeing the history, like for the Russia, if they wants to come down to the south and going to the Pacific, yes, Japan is located in a very key area, and also for today, yes, it's very our location is so important to block the Chinese going forward.
日本はそれをですね、本当に遮るための要衝であり、もちろんそのお隣にいるフィリピンもですね同様ですけれども、しっかりとここでですね進出を遮るための要衝となる。ですから位置的にはですねアドバンテージなのかもしれないんですけれども、日本にとっては不幸な状況が常に起こりうるというふうに認識をしています。
As for Japan, like it's very important to prevent these like invasions, and then same for the Philippines as well. And then, but for Japan, like it's not an advantage sometimes. Like maybe we may suffer the unfortunate situation.
日本は南北に約3000キロの地域で、そしてそこに約1万4000の島嶼からなる国です。
While Japan is like 3,000 kilometers long from the south to north, and then also there are the 14,000 islands located at.
非常にですね南北に細長い国ですので、戦略的重心が全くありません。
So it's narrow and long, the islands, and then that means like there's no strategic depth.
ですからこれをですねしっかりと防ぐためには、我々日本だけでは当然成し得ないことであって、まさしくですねその戦略重心を高めるためにも、後ろに控える米国やオーストラリア、そしてその他の国とですねしっかりとネットワークを作ることによってこの地域をですね安定を保てるというふうに思っています。今日はですねそういったことをお話しできればいいなと思っています。
Prevent this invasion, while Japan needs to have like more strategic depth while cooperating with the U.S. and Australia and the other partner nations to build a network, and then that is like our way to contribute to the peace and stability of this region. And I would like to talk about this kind of thing today. Thank you.
Thank you.
General Golito.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Is my karaoke voice good?
Advance.
You want a sample? Just kidding. Good day, and thank you very much, Derek Clark, for including me in discussion. I am very much honored to be part of this forum. And this topic finds extra relevance to the armies in the Indo-Pacific as we grapple with the strategic uncertainties in the region. Much has been said about positional advantage, but I believe that we can still continue to mine the concept and gain new insights that we could apply to our respective armies or collectively through exchanges like this. Indeed, while the logic of positioning as a warfare enabler has not changed, the manner by which it is achieved has become more complicated in the midst of rapidly changing operating environment. The expansion of the battle space, the evolution of warfare concept, as well as the maturation of game-changing technologies that have radically altered the very idea of key terrain. That is supposed to bestow the positional advantage in a multi-domain setting. Well, I would like to initially put forward some insights that would hopefully contribute to the discourse in achieving positional advantage in a modern battlefield. Thanks to General Brown, your multi-domain concept a decade ago, we have to strive for multi-domain positioning. To effectively position its forces, I believe this was clearly explained yesterday, armies must now go out of its comfort zone, which is the land, and start adopting all-domain mindset. This does not mean competing with other services, but rather acquiring an all-domain perspective and investing in essential capabilities that would give them substantial cross-domain reach. Second, I believe this is something new, we should never neglect cognitive positioning, or the human side of it. Related to the first point, which espouses a holistic approach to positioning by properly understanding the interplay among physical, virtual, and cognitive domains, it needs to be emphasized that cognitive positioning is as critical as physical positioning. Cognitive positioning gives us legitimacy and morality of action and clarity of purpose. At the same time, splinters the adversities, cohesion, and clouds the decision-making calculus. And last, aspire for positional advantage across the spectrum of conflict. Typically, we have two thoughts. One first thought is advocating for position in preparation for the conflict itself. And the other one is where the thought of positioning for conflict where the ultimate objective is a battlefield dominance. And the other one is on the perspective of positioning during peace and competition phase that could be effective in achieving national security objectives without crossing the threshold of conflict. That, General Clark, is my opening statement that should trigger some good questions later.
Thanks, Roy. Simon, floor is yours.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for the opportunity to be among friends and have this discussion. Positional advantage campaigning through combined and joint land power in competition was the exam question that we've been set today. So I would offer in opening just 5 points to frame our discussion, and some of them have already been very articulately put by General Morishita and General Keynote. The first, of course, is what's the purpose of campaigning in competition? Very clearly, it's to deter conflict, to deter a war. Deterrence can be somewhat of an ill-defined concept. Ultimately, it's part science and part art. Deterrence is ultimately determined in the mind of its objective, based on a calculus of physics and fear, honour and interest. There's a very human aspect to it as well. But in that calculus, there's a consideration of whether our ability to deter, which is founded in our ability to fight and win, that is to respond, is relevant and credible. And of course, relevance and credibility are relative to pacing threat and operating environment. So the questions that fall out of that are in relation to posture, weighting of effort, and risk sharing and risk calculus and risk acceptance. Second point is that campaigning is through the LANPAC network, and you're looking at it here in this room. Inherent in where we all live in terms of the physical terrain is positional advantage, both from a national and a multinational perspective. We already have the makings of joint interior lines and strategic depth throughout the Indo-Pacific theatre. Third point, to go to some of the excellent points that Roy just made, we need to be thinking beyond the important but limiting concept that anchors us in physical terrain in a multi-domain sense, because one, that's how we fight, but also where do we position in the human, the digital, the ethical and moral, and the other dimensions of where our national interests converge. I think it's also important to look at it from a temporal perspective, because we can't be everywhere with everything all the time. So our challenge is, how do we create what we call windows of convergence in time and space in order for us to be able to apply our asymmetric effects. And in those windows, perhaps a useful way of thinking about what it is we need to apply is what I describe as the value proposition of land power in the Indo-Pacific in the 21st century. 5 key characteristics that define what land power, what armies and marine forces bring to the joint fight. First is presence. We are there every day in key terrain. The map that Dr. McManus brought, that's where we live. That's where increasingly we are working, operating, rehearsing together. That's at a national level and a multinational level. Secondly, persistence. Soldier is the ultimate all-weather capability, all-terrain capability. Armies, land forces can persist and create persistent effect. The combination of presence and persistence means that we can apply our asymmetry. We heard yesterday repeatedly the asymmetric effect that stand-in land forces can have when positioned in the right place, the right time, with the right lethality against an A2AD system and complex that is optimised to defeat naval and air forces. But I also say that there is great asymmetry to be had at the tactical level through the defence. And by that I mean well-defended, well-sustained, lethal land forces in relatively modest formations have an asymmetric effect, because they then project onto any adversary the requirement to generate combat ratios of at least 3, probably 5, 8, 10 to 1 in order to disrupt, defeat or dislocate those land forces. And so through our understanding of the modern battle space, we know we've got to disperse. There's some challenges and cons with that, but there's also some advantages. And we need to be thinking about how we generate advantage through smaller formations that are well supplied, lethal, and enabled. The fourth aspect of our value as land power is versatility. You can take pretty much any Army or Marine unit and it can do pretty much anything from humanitarian assistance and disaster relief through the spectrum of combat operations. That gives us fantastic versatility and gives commanders options in our theatre, given the tyranny of distance. And the fifth and final one is value. Dollar for dollar, return on investment in land forces far outweighs what you've got to pay for some of the other platform-based domains. It's not good, bad, right or wrong or a competition. It's just part of our value proposition as land forces. That's all very good, but we've got work to do to ensure that we are optimised to deliver on that set of value propositions. And so the final point I'd make is just some reflections on what we're doing about it. And I'll just speak in terms of the Army that I'm privileged to lead today and just describe our approach to this. The big idea, going back to some of the discussion yesterday, is continual adaptation. That's our way of describing transforming in contact. The idea that has underpinned our modernisation previously has been about change, moving from one set of defined, relatively well understood, comfortable circumstances through a managed period of transition and turmoil to arrive at another set of defined, codified, relatively comfortable circumstances. That is just not the world we live in today. It's about continual adaptation, about getting it right enough in time. So that's the organising principle. And in order to ensure that we are fit for purpose for the challenges in our theatre in the 21st century, we need to take a very comprehensive approach. So four C's, if you like: concepts, C2, capability, and culture. I'll just quickly finish up with a brief explanation there. We have just rewritten and realigned all of our concepts to fit with our joint force concept of integrated campaigning. When you look at across most, if not all, of the armies represented here today, the concepts are pretty similar. We use different names. There are some nuances that pertain to us nationally, but they're pretty similar. So we've aligned, rewritten and realigned our land domain concept, our operating concept that converts the way we're going to fight into force structures, into doctrine, into TTPs. The key concept we are working to continually develop now is our littoral combat concept. But we've also focused on the integrating concepts because they are so important in a multi-domain environment. And the four that we focused on so far in terms of integrating concepts are integrated air and missile defence, multi-domain strike, special operations, and logistics. In terms of the littoral combat concept, that is very, very closely linked to what we're talking about today, and that's positional advantage. It's about opening and accessing the littorals that characterise our region, the places we live and operate, for the combined and joint force. In other words, this is a way of expanding the value that land forces provide to the joint team in the joint fight. Second C is C2. In other words, how are we organised at echelon? Where are the authorities? How do they align with TEAs in a multi-domain fight? When are we supporting and when are we supported? The third C is capability. That's the hardware, the tools for our soldiers to use. I'll just cover off on the key ones. One is the littoral manoeuvre program. We will field 28 ships, getting back into a capability that we haven't had since 1946, an organic capability to be able to force project to open and access the littorals. Long-range strike at operational and strategically relevant ranges. The opportunity, the ability and the capability to contribute and be able to achieve sea denial and to kill ships from the land, to dominate key and vital terrain in the archipelagic and the maritime region. Our combined arms fighting system, our ability to close and defeat an enemy, whether that's in the defence, the offence, or the combination of the two, and generate that asymmetric advantage. And then, of course, the underpinning and enabling functions across land, sea, for, and sustainment. And then finally, our culture. How do we build, train, educate, and experience resilient soldiers who can form part of cohesive teams that are led by leaders who have been set up for success and are able to lead in the complexity of the times? How are we paying attention to the state and the health of our profession as the underpinning intellectual, moral and ethical basis for the generation of land power? And in a combined and joint sense, how are we building trust?
Simon, thank you. So, gentlemen, as we think about positional advantage, in your opening comments, we talked about conceptually how we're all going about thinking about solving some of these challenges. I want to pull the thread and dig a little deeper on the actual operations, activities, and investments that you're making with land forces in the region to gain positional advantage. And with that, General Morishita, I'll give you the first crack at that question.
先ほど申し上げましたように、我々としてですね、今非常に危機に直面していると、日本は直面しているというふうに認識をしており、2022年にですね、の12月に我が国として国家安全保障戦略、そしてそれに基づく防衛戦略というのを策定いたしました。
Well, as I said a little bit before, for Japan, we feel the sense of we are facing the crisis now. So December 2022, we established a national security strategy and a national defense strategy.
しかしながら今まさにですね、今皆さんがおっしゃったように、それ以降に大きな変化、情勢の変更もしくはその急速な進展があるので、さらにもうそれではもう間に合わない部分も出てきましたが、今ですね、今ある戦略に基づいて今それを防衛力を高めつつ、そしてさらに次のステップというのは我々日本でも検討しているところです。
However, as my two friends just mentioned, the situation today is dramatically changing, and then so we try to be flexible, and then we try to develop our forces, our capabilities, and then somehow in the flexible way to see the next step.
まずですね、今現在の戦略の中で申し上げますと、一つはまずは対処力ということで、我が国の防衛力、それ自身をですね、しっかりと高度化し、この防衛力を高めることをまず第一義としています。
And then first thing we are now trying to do is to develop our response capability by ourselves.
これは今長射程火力ですとか機動力をしっかりと機動展開力を増強する話、そしてさらにはですね、宇宙、サイバー、電磁波を含めたフルスペクトラムでしっかりと戦える能力というのを今投資して、それを急速に向上しようとしております。
For instance, we try to introduce a long-range fire and also develop our high mobility And also, we introduced the fields of the space and cyber and the EW part, and then so that we can fight in the full spectrum way.
そしてですね、唯一の同盟国である米国とですね、しっかりと連携を取り、相互運用性を高め、2国による対処能力を高める、共同対処能力を高めるということを2つ目に掲げています。
And also, now we try to develop the cooperation with the U.S., which is only ally for Japan, and then while we try to develop our interoperability and also response capability.
そして3つ目がまさしく同志国と連携をとってですね、抑止力を高めていくんだということをこれを進めているところであります。
And the third thing is in order to develop our deterrence, we try to have the network with a like-minded country.
しかしですね、先ほど申し上げましたように、非常に情勢が大きく変わってきて、国家防衛安全保障戦略を作ったときに、もうすでにウクライナ戦争がウクライナとロシアのですね、紛争が始まってましたが、それがさらにですね、今長期化して状況が変わってきている、もしくは他の地域でも大きな紛争が起きたりですね、情勢が非常に変わってきて、もともと我々が持っていた戦略でも対応できなくなってきているのではないかという認識を持っています。
As I said, the situation today has totally changed when we established the national security strategy. Actually, when it is established, right after that, or at the same time, the conflict in the Ukraine and Russia already happened, and then now today it's getting longer than we expected, and then that means for us it's really hard for us to respond to this situation that what we have already.
ウクライナにおけるですね、教訓というのはやはり我々としては多くの教訓を今得ているところですが、その代表的なものをいくつかちょっと話したいと思います。
Well, as everybody knows, there's a lot of lessons learned from the conflict in Ukraine, and then I would like to highlight some of the points.
誰もですね、紛争が起こったとき、そして起こる前から起こって以降も当初ですね、これだけの長期間の大規模なですね、国家間の紛争が継続すると、こういった国家間の紛争が起こりうるというのは認識してなかったと思います。
When that happened, when that occurred, nobody thought such a nation-to-nation conflict it tends to be this long.
これをですね、インド太平洋地域に置き換えると、やはり紛争が起きそうな場所にですね、しっかりとした事前集積、そしてそこにしっかりと部隊を戦力を集中できる機動展開能力、そして外からもですね、火力を投射できる長射程の火力の能力、加えてそれをですね、しっかりと持続させるためのサステイメント、一つの国家だけでなく大きなみんなのですね、協力を得て実施をするサステイメントというのはこれが非常に大事だというふうに思っております。
And so it's important for us to think about the things, imagine that, if the conflict happened, what should we do in advance? For instance, for example, people is one thing, and then also we need to have more mobility or high mobility to concentrate our force in that timing. And also we need to have a long range fire and also sustainment. And the sustainment is a thing we cannot do it by ourselves only unilateral. We need to coordinate together with the other nations.
そして2つ目のですね、教訓は、我々としてウクライナとロシアの紛争を見ていると起きているのがですね、当然現代の現代、そして将来の戦い方を見据えて宇宙、サイバー、電磁波、こういったですね、フルスペクトルの戦いをしておりますが、この中においても現在の、そしてさらには過去の戦いもしっかりとそれに組み合わさっているというふうに認識をしています。
And then the second thing I would like to highlight as a lesson learned from the conflict in Ukraine is the way they fight is the things what we have today and maybe future. I mean, maybe it tends to be a full spectrum warfare now. The space and cyber EW is there, but also they still have a conventional warfighting method as well.
例えばですね、しっかりとですね、我々としても宇宙、サイバー、電磁波使い、そして長射程の火力を持ち、将来の戦い方をさらに増進していく、そして AI やですね、ドローンをしっかりと運用しながら省力化した戦い方も追求していかなければならないというのが将来の方向ではあると思います。
For example, in the future, we need to consider that more less manpowered, the war fighting way. We need to utilize space, cyber, EW, and long-range fire, and AI, and the drone.
しかしながらそのですね、ドメインの中でやはり地上のドメインではですね、 第二次世界大戦で行われたような大気候戦闘や、もしくは第一次世界大戦で行われている塹壕戦というのも、しっかりとそれによって、陣地がですね、少しずつ、進んでいくというような戦い方を、いまだにやはりこれを継続しなければならないんだという認識をしなければならない。
However, these domains are very important, but we have need to consider the other domains as well in the land conflict or the fighting. For instance, we still can see anti-armor capability is still important in the lessons of the situation in Ukraine, and also the trench war is also happening too. So that means we need to have these old one and the today's one and the future's one simultaneously.
そしてですね、今それに関係するんですが、最終的に今ですね、停戦交渉が行われて始まろうとしておりますが、今の現状を見てもやはり最後はしっかりと国境線を兵士がどれだけ守っているか、いわゆる兵士がいるところが国境線になっているということだと思います。
And also the very important thing is now that they start to do a negotiation for the ceasefire, though, but still the borderline, the national borderline is where the actual force or the actual soldiers are located at.
これはランドパワーがですね、陸軍種がしっかりとその地上を確保するということが、過去の戦争からですね、全く変化していないということです。
It means nothing has changed from the past war. The land power needs to capture and then they seize the borderline in the land.
これを太平洋ですね、インド太平洋地域に置き換えて我々のところに置き換えると、大陸での戦い、そして海や島嶼での戦いというのは、状況は大きくは変わると思います。
Well, when we consider the situation in the Pacific, and then the way to fight in the sea and the air has changed a lot.
この地域ではよくですね、海洋の戦いですとか、海での戦い、そして航空ドメインでの戦いの方が非常に重要だということで、海空戦力の重視が、私の国でもですね、そういった話が多く出ます。
And in this region, people say the warfare regarding the maritime and the air is so important.
しかしながらやはり海軍戦力、そして航空戦力というのは非常に有利ですけれども、機動力も持っていてパワーも非常に大きいんですが、やはりそれがですね、常続的に、気象やその他の影響を受けながらですね、受けるもので、常続的に持続的にそれを行使するのは難しいというふうに思っています。
And the maritime and the air force is very, has a lot of the advantage for sure. They have a high mobility and a big amount of the forces, yes. But still, they are affected by the weather condition or the other things, and then so it's really hard for them to keep their forces in the persistently.
そして、先ほど申し上げましたが、特性として島嶼国であるフィリピンもそうですけれども、いろんな島嶼がある。これらの島嶼については一旦これをですね、確保されると、敵に確保されるとですね、非常にそれは維持する、奪回するのが難しいということで、やはりしっかりとそれぞれの地域を固守することが大事だというふうに、上陸を拒否して固守することが大事だと思っています。
The same as the Philippines, as for the archipelagic country, it's really hard for us to recapture our territory once it is captured. So we need to keep staying there and then while protecting their own territory.
このためですね、我々として先ほどのですね、言った現在持っている戦略に沿って防衛力を強化していくわけですが、その中でも我が国のですね、陸上戦力の強化も一つのドメインのですね、強化ということとともにですね、一番最初にオープニングで申し上げたように、自らの国だけではなく各国との連携をとって、この国では、この地域では、インド太平洋地域においてこういった紛争を起こさせないと、みんなが共通の認識を持ってですね、活動する平素の抑止が非常に大事だというふうに思っています。
And then, as for Japan, Japan will develop its own force under the strategy we just established, and then, it's just not develop just one domain. We need to understand that it's really important for us to keep having a tolerance, as I said, with the other country as well. It's really important to have a network.
That's all. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Roy, how are you gaining positional advantage in the Philippines?
Very interesting. Well, as you've mentioned, we are in the stage of transitioning from addressing our internal problems to external. In terms of our internal security, we have definitely gained positional advantage to our internal adversary. And this was achieved through the one I mentioned, through taking advantage of the cognitive domain and the whole nation approach. And to our possible adversary, well, I can correlate this to, are you aware that the number one or the most much sought after sports in the Philippines is basketball? Are you aware of that? And our goal is to play in the Olympics. This is a correlation. We beat China. No, frankly speaking.
So did we, by the way.
No, frankly speaking, it's like, how can a 5-footer players beat 6 to 7 feet players? We looked up our human terrain and we brought in hybrids. From Australia, from the US, from Europe. And we beat China in a basketball game. I don't want to spill what I have for the positional advantage of our armed forces. I'll explain it later.
That's good enough. That's good. Well done.
Great.
Simon.
How do you follow that? I just offer that when you look at what we are collectively doing together, it increasingly looks like a campaign. And the factors that have generated that campaign approach and the campaign effects are that we have taken a series of exercises and deliberately turned them into operations, activities, and investments where we rehearse and demonstrate our collective capability. We've grown the number of bilateral, minilateral, and multilateral fora across the Indo-Pacific. And there are two words that are recurrent in every single one of those agreements. They are comprehensive and reciprocal. And we have focused on the coordination and the synchronization of what we are already doing together to generate that campaign effect. This has occurred at lightning speed in relative terms. If you look at where we were just 3 years ago, just 2 years ago, to where we are today, it is a phenomenal rate of growth of capability that is relevant, credible, and in the right place on a persistent basis. So we've gone from more flags is better, the flags are there, we're all there together, to increasing the sophistication, the depth and the scope of the operations, activities and investments excuse me, that we're doing together. We're doing that through three key vectors. One's integration, which has been spoken about a lot during LANPAC this year. People, procedures, the way we operate, we're doing, I think, exceptionally well at. It's the digital integration that is our current challenge when it comes to how we better integrate our forces. The second is deliberate design of those operations, activities and investments. A deliberate design to understand where we each add value, to make sure we aren't duplicating, to make sure where one has a strength, we can cover the other's weakness and vice versa. So we're getting a whole lot more return on our collective investment through the deliberate design and synchronisation of our OAI. And the third piece and final piece is we are building readiness. So as we deploy to prosecute that campaign through the operations, activities and investments that we are doing, we are both training, adapting and transforming our forces through that OAI design, so that when each of us deploy a formation, it returns more ready rather than having consumed readiness by deploying offshore or onshore into what was traditionally a set of battle rhythm exercises. So just offer those.
Thanks, Simon. Question from the audience, some convergence with questions. The question is, what do you see as we look at information advantage, as we work together through campaigning and with interoperability? What do you see as challenges to information sharing across multinational and multi-domain operations, and how can industry help? Well, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, when it comes to information sharing, I believe each respective armies, we have protocols that we have to overcome. And these protocols are established by our respective organization with the intention to protect. But when we try to work with each other, this is most often the first handicap of the first thing that we have to hurdle. How do we share information seamlessly in accordance to the respective protocols that we have established? Recently, the Philippines and the US have signed this GSOMIA agreement, and this will free up the hindrance. And again, warfare right now, a big factor in overcoming adversaries when there's information sharing on the fly. Technological, there's always a solution. Might be cheap, more often very expensive for us. So it's a matter of conducting regular training and interoperability check to know what we need to overcome. Because if we don't constantly do it and just perform during crisis, again, we can still overcome the challenges, but our reaction will be slow.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you.
Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Our ability to share data at machine speed is the challenge. 2 years ago, that was a technical challenge for us. It's not today. The challenge today is policy. And we haven't found a good way of solving that yet. So I think industry has done its part. It's now time for bureaucracies and decision makers to their part in terms of breaking down the policy or solving the policy barriers. And I think a useful lens to approach those policy challenges is a risk-based lens. And risks, of course, are relative. So you can consider the risks of sharing, but they need to be considered in the context of the risk of not sharing and the campaign consequences that emanate from that. In terms of what we are doing together, I think a game changer in the first instance, a first but significant step is the proliferation of SBU and SBU encrypted networks, so we can communicate, and it's a good way, I think, in accordance with the policies that currently apply. But when it comes to closing the kill web in what are generally, certainly in our case, still Type 1 haste systems, sharing data at machine speed is the challenge that we need to solve.
Yasu.
やはりですね、情報共有して、それをいかに発信していくか、それによってどうやってですね、我々としてそれをキャンペーンとしてキャンペーンの一部として位置づけていくかというのをよく各国で連携しながら考えていく必要があるというふうに思っています。
We need to understand how we share the information and how we message that things as a part of the campaign with the other nations.
ガリード司令官からもありましたようにですね、やはり我々として持っている情報を保全する、要するに隠しておく部分と、そして発信していく部分、どうやって区分しながらですね、やっていくか、キャンペーンしていくかというのをお互いに共通認識を持つということだと思います。
As just Ray mentioned, we need to find out what kind of information we should secure and what kind of the information we should use for the message.
もちろん発信したメッセージがですね、相手にどれだけ負荷をかけられるかというのは効果をなかなか判定しにくいところもありますが、それの効果の判定を同じ共通認識を持って活動していくということも大事だと思います。
Well, it's really hard for us to understand what kind of the effect we can give to the enemy with that announced message and how much effect we can get on it. But we need to have a shared understanding on it and then have the common idea for this.
そして各国においてですね、やはりそれをどこの意思決定のレベルで決定するのか、そしてさらにはどういった手続きでやるのかというのは各国によって違うと思います。
And also, each country have the different the levels of authority to send these messages, and also the procedure, the method is different.
それをしっかりと各国とですね、平素からすり合わせておいて、平素の活動、そしてそれにまた何かのですね、事態に対処するときに臨機にそれを応用して活用して一緒の共通認識の下で同じメッセージを発信していくというのもものすごく大事なことだと思います。
And from peacetime, we need to practice this kind of thing, and then you can utilize it to send the message regarding what we have in the peacetime in today's activity, and also we can utilize it in the conflict when it turns to be conflict as well. And then it's very important to work on this together.
まさしくですね、一番最初にガリード司令官が言ったように認知戦での戦い、このために我々としてもそれにですね、平素からしっかりとキャンペーンプランとしてですね、整合していくということが大事だと思います。
As General Garrido just mentioned, especially the cognitive domain is so important, and then we need to have a shared understanding on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And from our perspective, really, the feedback from all three of you encompasses some of the challenges that we're experiencing from the USTRPAC side. You know, for Simon, with Australia, we can somehow come together as two nations under AUKUS to collectively build a nuclear-powered, conventionally armed submarine, but we have challenges with regard to non-secure communications and secure communications between our land forces, which is emblematic of some of the challenges, but again, it gives us some opportunity because there's a framework there that we can use to continue to work through some of the challenges. Operationally, the GSOMIA, I mean, to be able to move forward with the Philippines in a way that's helpful, again, helps us get at some of those interoperability challenges and information sharing. And if we can build a program like Centrix J that allows us to communicate point to point with a trusted ally in Japan, we should find a way, and we're working through some challenges associated with building a network and mission partner environment that allows us to share not just bilaterally, but multilaterally in competition, crisis, and conflict. So we're moving in the right direction. Next question. Lots of discussion about asymmetry and the capabilities that the land forces provide to the joint force. But one of the means of asymmetric advantage and how we cause multiple dilemmas for our adversary involve space, counterspace, electronic warfare, collection, and massed long-range strike. Are you satisfied with the progress that you've made with fielding and integrating asymmetric capabilities for your Army? And with that, Simon, you get the first crack.
Yeah. Well, there's a great old saying, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. And that's how I would characterise the challenge. I'm never satisfied with where we're at today. We always want to be doing better and doing it sooner. Time is simply not on our side. I balance that by saying what we have done together collectively in just a couple of years is nothing short of remarkable. It is a very powerful expression of collective will that is credible because of our collective capability. And secondly, from an Australian Army perspective, I could not be prouder of the phenomenal innovation, effort, and sheer hard work that our soldiers have delivered in just 2 years to substantively transform our Army, our concepts, our C2 and organisation, our capabilities in stride delivery today, and some serious looking in the mirror and adjustments, improvements to our culture. So, I think we always aspire and strive for more and more quickly, but every now and then I think it's worth just taking a knee and azimuth check and appreciating what we have individually and collectively achieved in a very short time, which I do think is reflective of a deep understanding of what's at stake, the temporal aspect, and what that requires of us.
Thanks, Simon. Roy.
Well,
I'm sorry, Yazoo. I'm out of order. Yazoo.
me?
You knew what to do.
ですね、今言われたようにですね、非対称戦へのですね、特に新しいドメインである宇宙、サイバー、電磁波等に関しての具体的な我々としての能力について、のご質問というふうに認識をしました。
Well, I understand that the question is regarding the space and cyber and EW capabilities.
私ですね、日本では毎週記者会見をやらなければならないんでやってます。
Well, in Japan's case, every week, I have the duty to talk to the public. I mean, I have a public conference.
この手の質問に関しては常にですね、私は具体的な能力をここでお知らせすることについてはですね、敵に能力をそのまま示すことになるので発言を控えますというんですけど。
Every time, the people ask me about this capability, I always say if I talk to you now, that means enemy will know the specific the capability. So I can answer you specifically. I just say that.
しかしながらですね、具体的には示せませんが、我々としてもものすごくこれは陸上自衛隊としても大事な能力だというふうに認識をして、今まさにですね、能力強化を行っているところであります。
But what I can say is still it's very important domain for the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force as well as a part of the LANPAC, and then now we are trying to develop our capability on these items too.
もちろん合衆国軍に比べるとですね、その今大きな能力のギャップはあると思いますが、それをさらに一緒に共同して戦えるように我々としても今それの拡充を図っております。
Of course, comparing the U.S., there's a lot of big gap, but still, we try to catch up with the U.S. side so that we can fight it shoulder to shoulder.
陸軍士としてはやっぱりこれをですね、拡充するために今まさしく同盟国であるアメリカとですね、アメリカ陸軍と、そしてさらにはですね、NATO の国々を含めてですね、あらゆる国と今連携を取りながら、そして一緒にですね考えながら、さらにそれを充実させていこうと思って今やっております。
As the law enforcement, I'm responsible to develop this capability, and then so we learned a lot of things for the U.S. Army, which is the only ally for Japan, and also the NATO nations, and we discussed how we should develop this capability so that and reach this domain.
そして陸軍士としてということで言えば、我々としてはですね、地上に海空軍士のように機動力が高くありませんが、しっかりと地上にいて持続的にその効果を発揮できる、そして分散して小規模なものが分散してもそれが使えるというものをですね、我々として持っていきたいと思っています。
As the land force, while comparing with the Air Force or the Navy, like we do not have like a high mobility though. While still like we can have like a continuous effort on the land, and also like we can have like a dispersed like a small unit to make that effect.
Yeah, so, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, for the Philippine Army, the Armed Forces of the Philippines as a whole, we are in the transitioning stage of projecting our territorial defense capability. The asymmetric warfare, when you talk to any Filipino armed forces, a member, first thing that would come into their mind is guerrilla warfare, which we are very good at. But the asymmetric warfare we're talking about right now is the Olympics. It's something new for us. Just like what I mentioned earlier, we beat China in a basketball game, but the preparation wasn't done overnight. It was done years. And it took our businessmen to pitch in to get the best hybrid Filipino players from other leagues back to our country. It took a national will for us to have a place in that league, similar with what we're doing right now. We are little by little building our platforms. The platforms you've mentioned, yes, they are part of our wish list, but more importantly right now is we're capitalizing on the concept of human terrain, which I am 100% sure with the number of Filipinos around in our country, and we develop this sense of patriotism and will to fight, any platform that is given to us will be very much functional when it comes to defending our territory. How I wish this list will be easily acquired.
Thank you, sir. We're down to exactly 5 minutes. And with that, closing remarks. Drum Marine.
本当に今回はですね、このような我々で一緒にお話しする機会を得ましたことを感謝申し上げます。ありがとうございます。
Again, I would like to express my appreciation to all of you. Like, it is my privilege to have like the panel with you like this.
そしてですね、私が申し上げたですね、この平和と安定を維持するために何が大事かということは、本当にこのLANPACでですね、一番大きく追求できるものだというふうに思っています。
And as touched upon earlier, in order to develop the peace and stability in this region, the LANPAC is so important.
というのは我が国自身の努力、防衛力を高めるものもものすごくお金がかかりますし、そして対処能力、同盟国も含めて対処能力を向上するというのは数多くの訓練をこなし、やはりこれもですね、予算を費やしてものすごく手間がかかる、時間もかかるものだというふうに思っています。
Developing own defense capability is like a very, takes like a lot of the, it's pricey. Where we need to pay a lot of the money on it, and also it's the same as the other nations as well, the partners as well. And then we have to do a lot of trainings, and then yes, we have to do a lot.
しかし同志国との連携を取るにあたっては、この場LANPACでもいてもそうですけれども、各国のですね、軍の参謀長や司令官、そのハイレベルが一緒に集まってしっかりと認識を揃える、頭を揃えてですね、この地域の平和と安定にそれぞれが努力するんだということをしっかりとやっていけば、ですね、この地域の平和と安定というのを追求できるので、大きな一番の抑止力につながるというふうに思っていますので、本当にこのLANPACというのはありがたい機会だなというふうに思っています。
However, in order to develop the cooperation with a like-minded country, it's not so much it doesn't take such a big cost. As we have here, as we all of us here together, we can discuss together with a lot of the chiefs and also the commanders of each nations here, and then having a shared understanding, and then and also we can understand that what kind of efforts they are making for, and then we are making for, or the ONU is making for it, and then that is a very great contribution for the peace and the stability in this region, and that's the biggest biggest deterrence can be established in here. And then the LANPAC is such a great opportunity for us to participate and then to make the effort.
Thank you.
General Galito.
Well, General Clark, thank you very much. Thank you very much, partners, teammates, for this opportunity for us to share our situation. I hope we can play basketball soon. Well, kidding aside, I didn't want to tell more because I don't want to spoil what I'll be saying this afternoon, and I hope to see you later. The quest for positional advantage is clearly becoming an imperative for national or collective survival. As contending forces race to find and secure the new high ground, the challenge lies mainly on how to recognize and leverage these key terrains in a multi-domain battle space with respect to its adopted strategy and capabilities to generate the envisioned positional advantage and benefits. Again, I have more to say this afternoon, so hope to see you. Thank you very much, General Clark. Mabuhay, aloha, mahalo.
Simon, take us home.
Thanks. Look, thanks for the opportunity, and I, for one, will be at Roy's keynote this afternoon, so don't miss it. 3 points, if I may, just in closing: strategic, operational, tactical. The ultimate expression of national will and endeavour is putting our young women and men on the ground among populations and in harm's way. That is the primary value of the strategic land power network. Operationally, in order to realise our theory of victory, we need to be continually assessing and updating and changing our campaign approach. And I think collectively we can work together to focus in our PME a whole lot more effort on the operational art and its application. And then tactically, I think we are in great shape. If you look at where we are throughout the theatre, positional advantage, combined and joint interior lines, strategic depth. We are meeting head-on the challenges that the Indo-Pacific region present to us. And that's due to the tactical efforts of our soldiers and Marines every single day, working shoulder to shoulder in increasingly cohesive teams, multinational teams, that are able to prosecute combat operations, demonstrations, and rehearsals through our program of OIOA and that campaign to achieve our theory of victory in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
And again, we're talking about positional advantage. The asymmetric advantage that we have here at LANPAC is this network of partners and allies that we talk about, the Strategic Land Power Network. It's evident throughout this room. So I want to thank AUSA and the team from LANPAC for putting this forum together, for assembling this panel of absolute warriors and experts that it has been my complete honor to serve with. I'd be remiss if I didn't borrow one of Simon's Army's great concepts, and that's the concept of mateship. It's stronger than friendship. It's a bond forged through service together. And the spirit of mateship between the four of us is exceptionally strong, and I really appreciate my mateship with you. Because what it comes down to, at the end of the day, is this is about people. And there's no stronger human emotion than a feeling to belong, especially to something that is transformational, like the service to your country, shoulder to shoulder with your partners and allies in a noble and common mission to prevent war. And with that, thank you so much.
Wow. Sir, thank you for a great discussion, all of you. What a representation of the land power network here in the Indo-Pacific. We're now going to take a 30-minute break. Please join us in the morning refreshment area over there in the Hawaii Ballroom in Honolulu Suites. And our refreshment break this morning is sponsored by Fluor. So thanks to Fluor. We will resume the presentations at 11:15.
Join us at the premier Land Power Symposium in the European Theater. Register now at ausa.org/LandEuros.
It's gonna be a lovely